War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Republicans are mounting increasing pressure on Missouri Congressmember Todd Akin to end his bid to unseat Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill after he claimed women's bodies can prevent pregnancies in cases of what he called legitimate rape. Republicans had been hoping an Akin victory could help the party regain control of the Senate. Akin's a six-term Congressmember with Tea Party backing. The controversy began Sunday when a local TV reporter asked Akin about his opposition to abortion in all cases.
What about in the case of rape? Should it be legal or not?
Well, you know, people always want to try and make that as one of those things. Well, how do you slice this particularly tough sort of ethical question? It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. But let's assume that maybe that didn't work or something. You know, I think there should be some punishment, but the punishment ought to be in the rapist and not attacking the child.
After the interview aired, Todd Akin issued a statement saying he, quote, misspoke in this interview, and it does not reflect the deep empathy I hold for thousands of women who are raped and abused every year, unquote. Politico revealed this morning that Akin has also recorded a TV ad to apologize for his comments.
I'm Todd Akin, and I approve this message. Rape is an evil act. I used the wrong words in the wrong way, and for that I apologize. As the father of two daughters, I want tough justice for predators. I have a compassionate heart for the victims of sexual assault, and I pray for them. The fact is, rape can lead to pregnancy. The truth is, rape has many victims. The mistake I made was in the words I said, not in the heart I hold. I ask for your forgiveness.
Despite Todd Akin's apology, the Republican establishment has unleashed a campaign to drive Akin out of the race. The National Republican Senatorial Committee declared it would withdraw support for Akin, as did the Republican advocacy group Crossroads GPS. Under Missouri law, candidates can withdraw 11 weeks before Election Day. That deadline is 5 p.m. today in Missouri time. While presidential hopeful Mitt Romney has criticized Akin's remarks, questions have been raised about ties between Akin and vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan. In 2011, Ryan and Akin co-sponsored the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. On Monday, President Barack Obama addressed the controversy during a surprise briefing at the White House.
Rape is rape. And the idea that we should be parsing and qualifying and slicing what types of rape we're talking about doesn't make sense to the American people, and certainly doesn't make sense to me. So what I think these comments do underscore is why we shouldn't have a bunch of politicians, a majority of whom are men, making healthcare decisions on behalf of women.
Well, for more, we're joined by Michelle Goldberg, senior writer for Newsweek, The Daily Beast. Her latest piece is titled Todd Akin's Rape Comment Was Bad, but His Abortion Views Are Much Worse. She's also author of Kingdom Coming, The Rise of Christian Nationalism, as well as The Means of Reproduction, Sex, Power, and the Future of the World. Michelle Goldberg, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's good to have you with us. So let's go through everything Akin said, what his views are, and let's go beyond Sunday, but we'll start there.
So what Akin said, obviously, that was controversial, and that differs from the vast majority of his Republican colleagues, is only his views about the kind of magic powers of the uterus to activate in cases of rape and somehow kill sperm. And this is a canard that has kind of floated around the far right. The reason that it's so toxic is because it's not just because of his view that women should be forced to carry pregnancies to term even if they're the result of rape, but because he's essentially arguing that women who have been impregnated by rape, and, you know, according to the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, that's about 32,000 women in America a year, that he's suggesting that they weren't really raped, or that, you know, some of the other people who've kind of peddled this junk science says, well, you know, the juices don't flow if she's raped, the implication being that if she gets pregnant, it's because she somehow enjoyed it. Or, you know, there's also an old medieval superstition about how a woman can't conceive unless she has an orgasm, which seems to feed into some of this. So that's the part that's toxic, I think, across the board for even anti-abortion Republicans. But what there's no difference between Akin's views on abortion policy and on abortion law, and that of Ryan and many other Republicans, including many of the Republican headliners at the RNC next week. And I think that one of the reasons there's such a huge push to get him out of the race is because that's not particularly something that the Republican Party wants to highlight right now.
Let's talk about Todd Akin and the man who was charged to call him and tell him to get out of the race, the presumptive vice presidential Republican nominee, Paul Ryan.
Right. So Paul Ryan, like Todd Akin, does not believe that there should be any exceptions to a total abortion ban for cases of rape and incest. He, in the past, has only supported exceptions that would save a mother's life, not save a mother's health. You know, and again, so he believes and has always believed and has sponsored legislation to the effect that a woman who gets pregnant through rape should be forced by the government to carry that baby to term. They've collaborated on several pieces of legislation. They co-sponsored they co-sponsored what was basically a federal personhood amendment, which would give the full rights of an American citizen to a fertilized egg, and which a lot of legal scholars say would not only outlaw all forms of abortion, but would outlaw the morning after pill, would outlaw some forms of birth control, would outlaw common forms of in vitro fertilization. They also both co-sponsored the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, which you explained before. And there was a lot of provisions in the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, or H.R. 3. One of the interesting provisions was that they tried to, right now, there's federal law bans federal funding for abortion for low-income women and government employees and military service members. Well, actually, this is interesting because Akin and Ryan have also both opposed legislation that would allow funding for abortions for female service members who've been raped. And as you know, rape in the military is at kind of epidemic levels. But the federal law right now bans federal funding for abortion in cases of rape and incest. They tried to change that to federal funding bans abortion except in cases of quote-unquote forcible rape. That, if you heard Todd Akin speaking yesterday on my Huckabee show, he said that by legitimate rape, he meant to say forcible rape.
Actually, let's go right to Huckabee's show. Okay. Let's go to that comment of Congressman Akin.
I've really made a couple of serious mistakes here that were just wrong, and I need to apologize for those. First, I might say that I've always been committed to pro-life, and it was because I didn't want to harm the most vulnerable. But likewise, I care deeply, for the victims of people who've been raped, and they're equally vulnerable, and a rape is equally tragic. And I made that statement in error. Let me be clear. Rape is never legitimate. It's an evil act, and it's committed by violent predators. I used the wrong words in the wrong way. What I said was ill-conceived, and it was wrong. And for that, I apologize.
That was Todd Akin and the former Republican presidential candidate, Mike Huckabee's radio show.
Right. Mike Huckabee, another one, is speaking at the Republican National Convention, who also believes that abortion should be banned in cases of rape and incest. But so here's why this phrase forcible rape is interesting. In 1999, a guy named John Wilkie, who's the founder of the National Right to Life Committee, wrote an article. My guess is it's the article where Todd Akin got his ideas about female reproductive biology, because it basically it makes the same argument that he made, that when feminists or pro-choice advocates talk about an abortion exception for rape, it's kind of a canard, because in fact rape, pregnancy related from rape is extremely rare because of the trauma of rape sets off a kind of endocrine response that makes pregnancy impossible. One of the things he talks about in this article is he says, pro-life advocates should always make a distinction should always talk about forcible rape as opposed to rape.
This is Wilkie.
This is Wilkie, for a couple of reasons. I mean, partly to distinguish it from statutory rape, and he also argues that a lot of women simply claim rape after they've become pregnant from consensual sex. So the fact that this phrase has kind of entered not just the Republican lexicon, but that they've actually tried to write it into law, is significant. And of course, what it implies is that there is real rape or legitimate rape, and then lesser forms of rape for which kind of exemptions shouldn't be made.
Well, of course, if you talk about forcible rape, which was in the legislation co-sponsored by Akin and Ryan, that suggests there's something called, what, voluntary rape?
Right, exactly. Yes, voluntary rape, nonviolent rape. Again, part of what they're talking about is statutory rape, you know, the kind of, because there's a massive gap in people's ages. But again, that means that essentially, you know, a 13-year-old girl with a 30-year-old man, she wouldn't be kind of entitled to any sort of federal protection if she gets pregnant. But yeah, beyond that, it's a little unclear. I mean, forcible rape is a term that's in a lot of state penal codes, but it's unclear what that would mean at the federal level in terms of funding, you know, whether it would, say, bar funding in a case where a woman was drugged or, you know, where a woman was simply threatened. To me, the point is that it was clearly an attempt to narrow the rape exemption and to say that some forms of rape are not as serious as others and don't really count.
I wanted to stay with John Wilkie for a minute. The article you mentioned that he wrote called "Assault Rape Pregnancies Are Rare." In it, Wilkie arguing that rape statistics are uncertain because some women are, quote, pregnant from consensual intercourse, have later claimed rape. Also writing, quote, "To get and stay pregnant, a woman's body must produce a very sophisticated mix of hormones. Hormone production is controlled by a part of the brain that's easily influenced by emotions. There's no greater emotional trauma than can be experienced by a woman than an assault rape," unquote. That's John C. Wilkie, often referred to as the father of the pro-life movement. You also report that Wilkie endorsed Governor Romney for president in 2007.
Well, and not just that Wilkie endorsed, because, you know, no politician is responsible for their endorsers, but the Romney campaign really touted him as a major surrogate and as a kind of, you know, as a really credible voice to the anti-abortion community.
And he's not the only one. You've got, back in July 2010, Nevada Senate candidate Sharron Angle asking on a conservative radio show, what do you say to a young girl who's raped by her father? Let's say she's pregnant. How do you explain this to her in terms of wanting her to go through the process of having the baby? She's asked this question, and she says, "I think two wrongs don't make a right. I've been in the situation of counseling young girls, not 13 but 15, who've had very at-risk, difficult pregnancies. My counsel was to look for alternatives, which they did. They found they had made what was really a lemon situation into lemonade."
Right. And this, I think, is the real issue. I mean, I don't think that voters have less reason to be concerned about Todd Akin's kind of fantastical notions about female reproductive biology. What really matters is the policies that he supports, and, you know, the policy of kind of forcing rape victims, like I said, to carry pregnancies to term against their will. And that's a view that used to be fairly marginal in the Republican Party. I mean, you know, as little as 5 or 6 years ago, but has now become incredibly mainstream to the point where it's, you know, been espoused by both of the last 2 Republican vice presidential nominees.
We're talking to Michelle Goldberg, a senior writer for Newsweek, The Daily Beast, who's been covering these issues. Now what happens? And where does Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan go?
Right. Well, my sense is they want him out of the race precisely because he highlights this issue that they don't want to talk about. If you saw the National Review editorial saying, you know, Akin, get out, it was partly because, as they said, you know, other Republicans hold this minority position but are able to talk about it in a way that doesn't make them unelectable. Akin can't do that. So, you know, every day that we're talking about Akin, we're not just talking about Akin. We're also talking about Ryan and, you know, the kind of incredible rightward lurch of the Republican Party. So they're trying to get him out. You know, they've said they were going to withdraw support. Crossroads GPS, you know, they're withdrawing support. But as of now, it doesn't look like Akin is going anywhere. And I think what will be really interesting to see is the degree to which kind of the Christian right rallies around him, because, you know, some major Christian right organizations, Family Research Council,
have already endorsed him.
Have already, and not just endorsed him, but kind of said that he should stay in the race.
Right, endorsing him staying. I want to go to Paul Ryan, who's no one is calling for him to step out.
Right, certainly.
His view on birth control. Earlier this year, Congressman Ryan told David Gregory on Meet the Press he wasn't concerned about Republicans overplaying their hand on the issue of contraception and women's health. He suggested the government requiring employers to pay for birth control would violate people's freedom of religion. Let's go to that clip.
what we're getting from the White House with this conscience issue, it's not an issue about contraception. It's an issue that reveals a political philosophy that the president is showing that basically treats our constitutional rights as if they're revocable privileges from our government, not inalienable rights by our creator. And so what I would simply say is we're seeing this new government activism, sort of a paternalistic, arrogant political philosophy that puts new government-granted rights in the way of our constitutional rights. And so what I think it really is that it's an argument for freedom, for our founding principles, and for protecting those constitutional rights, which right now with this new mandate from HHS, like I said, it's really not about contraception. It's about violating our First Amendment rights to religious freedom and of conscience.
That's Congressmember Paul Ryan.
You know, I don't have the slightest idea about what his kind of personal beliefs about contraception. He's not like Rick Santorum, who has said that he wanted to use the power of the presidency to kind of inveigh against its evils. What we do know about him is that he co-sponsored this Sanctity of Human Life Amendment, this, so-called Sanctity of Human Life Law, this so-called federal personhood bill, which, whatever his intentions were regarding contraception, in practice would have banned, or at least allowed states to ban, many common forms of birth control, including the IUD, the birth control pill, certainly the morning after pill.
Because it gives personhood to a fertilized egg.
Right, and because some of these methods of birth control work to prevent implantation as opposed to fertilization. So yes, once kind of sperm meets egg, that entity has as many rights as as you or I.
So you have Mitt Romney saying at the Iowa State Fair last year that corporations are people. Then you have Paul Ryan saying that zygotes are people.
Right, and but somehow nobody will say that women are people. I mean, one of the interesting things about this is that, when Paul Ryan wrote this op-ed about how he reconciles his pro-life absolutism with his kind of Ayn Randian libertarianism, he talked about the rights of the rights of the fertilized egg or the rights of the embryo or fetus. He didn't kind of mention women in this piece even once. I mean, even to kind of consider their rights or agency, it was just a non-issue to him.
His views on Planned Parenthood and where they stand.
He wants to completely defund it, as does Mitt Romney. So in that sense, there's no difference between them. I think they both want to, in the past, it was really typical for Republicans to want to, put a lot of limits on Planned Parenthood, to, make sure that money given to Planned Parenthood for family planning activities was sequestered from any of their kind of abortion-related services. No, they both want to completely strip Planned Parenthood of all, and not just Planned Parenthood, all kind of federal family planning programs of all funding.
Let's turn to an ad approved by the Obama administration that features a series of women talking about Mitt Romney's plans to defund Planned Parenthood. We thought we had that. But I also want to talk about Mitt Romney and his stance right now on Akin. He came out pretty quickly and said this is offensive. But let's go back a little bit to Sandra Fluke, the young law school student who wanted to testify before Congress about the importance of funding of contraception for students. And Rush Limbaugh's attack on her, calling her a slut and a prostitute. And he even said that they should post video of her online. She should be forced to post video of herself online having sex. When he called her a slut, what exactly were Mitt Romney's words?
I believe they were something to the effect of, I would have used different language.
In fact, with Akin, he also came out a little softer at the beginning, before this tidal wave of anger, not as explicitly as he recently just talked about his views being offensive.
Well, and there's a lot of differences between Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh is obviously a much more powerful figure with a lot more support than Todd Akin is. Todd Akin had already kind of defied the Republican Party in this race. He already had alienated a lot of Republicans. And also, this language, because, again, it seemed to kind of impugn the morality of rape victims who become pregnant, including, anti-abortion rape victims, that outraged not just, people on the left, but it also, you have people like Michelle Malkin and Ann Coulter and people like that calling for him to step aside. There's a group called Live Action, which is, known for sending people undercover into abortion clinics to try to prove that they're doing something sinister. One of the things that they've been trying to prove is that abortion clinics aren't reporting instances of rape, and so so the idea that kind of rape victims don't get pregnant is anathema to them. They're, the personhood people, the people who've been pushing these personhood amendments all across the country.
That Paul Ryan supports.
Right, that Paul Ryan supports. They have people on their staff who they say are, or who I'm sure are whose mothers were rape victims and who brought them to term, and who go around saying, I have a right to live. So this is not, so the idea that kind of, again, that rape never results in pregnancy, it's not as if this is a kind of universal message among the anti-abortion movement, although it is part of the pseudoscience that governs some of them.
I want to thank you very much for being with us. Michelle Goldberg, senior writer for Newsweek, The Daily Beast, author of Kingdom Coming, The Rise of Christian Nationalism and the Means of Reproduction, Sex, Power, and the Future of the World. Her latest piece is Todd Akin's rape comment was bad, but his abortion views are much worse. We'll link to it at democracynow.org. Thanks so much, Michelle. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.